Good evening. I'm the James Dickey Curator of Contemporary Art, and it is a pleasure to welcome you here tonight for our Collectors Roundtable program. Before we begin, if I could just ask everyone to turn off cell phones and any other mobile devices. We're going to have a short question and answer period following the lecture this evening. And I would just ask that if you do have a question for our speaker, if you could speak into the microphones, which we normally have in the aisles, but I don't see them tonight. So maybe we're dispensing with that. At any rate, but I do encourage questions, and if these microphones appear in the aisles at the end of the program, please direct your questions from the microphone so that our audience who's tuning in via webcast can hear your question and the answer. Tonight's program is the third and final lecture in our Collectors Roundtable series, which is designed to offer insights and advice from museum directors, collectors, dealers from across the country. The series is made possible by the Thelma and Melvin Lincoln Foundation, and we're joined tonight by our sponsors, which we are very, very grateful for. And our speaker this evening is Robert Lehrman, a DC-based collector and philanthropist with a passion for contemporary art, which he's going to describe, I think, in a fascinating lecture. He's intending to address a variety of subjects, each of them huge lectures in and of themselves, but in particular, I think of great importance, the role of art in our society and culture, the relationship between aesthetic and financial value, and how to read art that seems unintelligible, that's a huge question. Robert has been collecting since 1979 with a primary focus on art of our times. His collection includes painting and sculpture and consists predominantly of American and European artists, namely William Christenberry, Damien Hirst, Agnes Martin, Gerhard Richter, Andy Warhol. He also has one of the most comprehensive collections of Joseph Cornell. And as founder and president of the Voyager Foundation, he collaborated with the Smithsonian American Art Museum to produce what became an award-winning book and an interactive DVD-ROM on the life and work of Joseph Cornell. Robert has lectured extensively on art appreciation at museums and universities across the country. He believes intensely that collecting and supporting art organizations is a vital civic responsibility, and he serves on the Board of Trustees at the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden here in Washington, where he was chairman of the board from 1998 to 2003. So it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Robert to the stage.
Thanks, Joanna. The opportunity to speak to you tonight is a thrill to me, and I also want to thank Betsy Brune, who, as you all know, runs the show here, and also Nona Martin, who has done all the legwork to make this possible. When I was asked to speak, I gave a working title called Secrets of Art, and in the process of thinking about what they might be to lure you in here, it occurred to me that there is a big and broad topic that I want to broach with you. In the past, I've done varying lectures on how you collect and how I got to my collection, and I hope you'll find this overview a little more interesting. I want to consider a topic tonight that's broader than the many components of collecting. We'll take a visit through the many venues where art is seen, judged, appreciated, and eventually sold. The word itself has a host of connotations, and they're not always considered polite. Our journey will take you to what I've learned not only in museums, galleries, art fairs, and auctions, but also, and I think most importantly, from living with and thinking about contemporary art for the last 30 years. On this journey, I've learned much from many colleagues and mentors, some who are actually here tonight, and I'm very grateful to them and truly feel like they're not only my kindred spirits, but actually a part of my extended family. For me, this adventure has been a search for another way of perceiving and perhaps understanding and appreciating the often unintelligible and always demanding and ever-evolving world of contemporary art. And if it takes us briefly to consider the mire of money, which to some is an inappropriate subject, then I hope you'll bear with me. Because the path of art from conception in the artist's mind to its creation in the studio does move through the galleries into the marketplace of ideas, where it will be judged for its originality and its staying power until it gets, hopefully, to its final resting place in a museum, where the financial facets fade and the money as a reflection of society's validation disappears. Along the way, money is nevertheless an interesting, if some feel distorting, metric. It's certainly not the only one and not very polite, but still a compelling part of the story for no other reason than it's an easy measure to understand, and sometimes not so easy to understand. It's important to note that fair market value is not the same as actual worth when we're thinking about art. Even at its immensely high price, a popular piece of artwork could and often does eventually fall out of favor and lose its appeal. Sometimes that will come back, often it doesn't. This speaks to both the subjectivity of what's considered fair market value and also its fluctuations in time and place. And other works with no marketable fair market value nonetheless can become treasured. Think, for instance, of Van Gogh, or be priceless to you for other reasons. So how does this market differentiate between these wide range of differences? That's one of the things that we're going to explore tonight. I'd like to share an idea and propose a hypothesis that I find fascinating and which might be helpful, if not necessarily entirely accurate. Our society, and by extension the human condition, prizes and benefits from quality of thinking in its many manifestations in science, technology, medicine, political thinking, and also, of course, the arts. Our lives benefit from this Darwinian march out of our not too distant primordial paths by the innumerable advances generated by our curiosity and our need. One of our most distinctive traits is our growth and capacity to evolve. And so the symbols that reflect our state of being also move with us, hopscotching from the caves of Lascaux to the religious art of feudal times up through the Enlightenment and the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, and eventually this history of enormously complex ideas takes us, as it were, to putting a man on the moon. Similarly, in the arts, we have come to see and experience a vastly different world thanks to a progression of innovative ideas that open an ever-widening field of flowering possibilities in the many faceted expressions of visual creation. It has been said that the history of 20th century art, starting with Picasso and continuing through Duchamp, and the many fascinating march of the isms, has been driven by and largely based on this evolution of ideas, made manifest not just an old-fashioned pictorial space, but an explosion of media and mediums that continue to both provoke, challenge, and reward our explorations. And what I'd like to suggest as we're about to jump into the actual lecture is that in science, R&D, research and development, if 99% of any experiments fail, they can be forgiven if the 1% finds a new drug or the cure. Similarly, great art takes us to new levels of insight and appreciation and eventually a richer and deeper and more nuanced understanding of the human condition. And this, I really fervently believe, is what it's all about. So with that as a prologue, I'm hoping to be able to show you not only the agony of doubt, but also the ecstasy of discovery, the aha moments that exist on both sides of the creative process. The artist making the work and you, the audience, considering these metaphors of existence are truly beyond the metrics of money, whether you view them as worthless or priceless. The question of what's truly new is, I think, essential to looking at contemporary art, the difference, and I might add that these photographs were taken getting off a plane from a financial management banking company that was trying to adopt art as its new pet. An interesting and very, I think, unusual position for the financial community, but it's something we're seeing more and more. What is really new versus what's only novelty? These tennis sneakers were from the gift store of a Murakami exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum of Art, and the Louis Vuitton branding I thought was enormously surprising to see in a museum, even in the gift store, but the connection, of course, to the branding in the world of art is something we're going to see and talk a little bit more about. This picture was far more funny, Bwana Devil in 3D from the 50s, before the actual 3D of the recent movie has made it seem more credible. But I do think that contemporary art and its many ideas help us, and if it is successful, they allow us to see the world with a much more vibrant vision, not just of the art that we're actually seeing, but as we'll loop back to this idea of the world beyond that we experience and have to navigate. Ultimately, when you're collecting and when you're looking at art, what turns you on is the arbiter of your enjoyment. And you can decide whether you like it or not, although as Marcia Tucker, the former director of the new museum, told me, she said, Robert, when you're looking at art, don't wear the Roman emperor's toga and have your thumb up if you love it and your thumb down if you don't. Actually listen to it and try to learn from it. And even if you don't think you like it, give it a chance to speak to you and see what it's saying. And it's often those kind of additional efforts that allow us, when we see things that aren't initially clear, that help us to enjoy them in new and, I think, dynamic ways. There is a battle going on always between truth and beauty. We're looking at a picture that is obviously conceptual by John Baldessari. It says pure beauty. And I'd like to read, and this will be the last time I'll have a prepared script, from no less an authority than Steve Martin, who said, if there's something I can pretend to have learned from modern art, it's that you can't make something beautiful by trying to make something beautiful. It becomes beautiful in the process of becoming something else. Now, let's see what that something else might mean. When we start looking at art, there are a lot of sources out there. Certainly subscribing to the major art museums gives us an easy and quick overview of what's going on in the world. There are books, and this group suggests an education on some of the classics, but in addition, going to the galleries will allow you to get artist monographs and learn what different curators are thinking is interesting, what's out there, what's happening at the moment. There are art exhibitions that can be seen in Washington, in New York, in Los Angeles, and of course, they are offering us new ideas for new times. This is an image, of course, of Bilbao. It's interesting how the medium changes the message. Bilbao and Frank Gehry's amazing miracle, the first postmodern building of the 21st century, could never have been created without the exceptional advancement of computer-generated technology, which allowed these unpredictable curves to actually be built, to be predicted, to be manufactured. And I mention that because one of the questions that I'm constantly coming to terms with is how do new modes of technology affect expressions in contemporary art? And we'll see some of those as we move forward. As you look at the things in the art galleries, in the museums, and in other places, I keep a running diary that allows me to both note things I don't understand and then try to return to them, often with the benefit of reviews by more knowledgeable or experienced or poetic art critics than myself. You can see that the same methodology of applying a certain structure, in this case a grid of many colored cubes, is used by 3 different artists in different ways. There is no substitute, of course, for actually seeing these things in person in order to get the scale, the presence, the physicality, and the real sense of what they are about. Traveling is one of the great perks of being curious in the art world. One of the things that I thought was a backstory on this cold, wintry day when my wife and I went to see the Gates Project in Central Park in New York, Christo and his wife worked on this for about 25 years, could not get it approved. The reason I was told, and I think this is fascinating, that it was approved for February was the mayor recognized that this was a lull in New York's tourism business and that it would bring an influx of potential business to the great city of New York. And so they scheduled it for the winter, and it was a fascinating experience, as Christo's experiences almost always are, and yet another example of how you really do have to be there to understand and feel what it's about. There is a chance to go to art fairs. You'll see that my son and my wife's art is enormously impressed with the Damien Hirst picture behind him. But he's considering something on the other wall with evidently great uncertainty, and I certainly know that feeling. When we go, as I said, as Marcia Tucker suggested, having an attitude of openness, of inquiry, in which we can celebrate the new, is an important component of getting something back from your efforts and from your time. Pictured below is an extraordinary, in my mind, juxtaposition of, in the far distant, Marilyn Monroe's Lips 100 Times by Andy Warhol, and hanging down are a series of hangers that local artist Dan Steinhelber created, and above that the three circles. Those are Sweeta, Splenda, and other artificial sweeteners that were placed in the auspicious setting of a garbage can top and then made into a work of art. I have one of those in my collection and I'm thrilled and love having it. Better living through chemistry is, of course, something that we all experience, and that Damien Hirst, one of the young British artists, has made an enormous focus on. What you are looking now is a cabinet that is full of boxes of medicine. It is the kind of thing that I think we could easily dismiss, and which raises an enormous set of interesting questions which we're going to approach tangentially and directly. I can tell you by cutting to the chase that at some point, having seen enough of these, and he did his first as his senior thesis when he was an art college graduate. He took, I'm told, the contents of his grandmother's bathroom and decided that he would make a medicine cabinet, and then he did another 11 of them and presented them as his work of art for his senior thesis show. And now when I go, as you will see when we move further along, into a drugstore, I think of Damien Hirst. And I'm going, oh my goodness, he's managed to change the way I see things. This is this is a close-up of an extraordinary work in which there is a bright, shiny, reflective background. The pills that are on these shelves are no longer actual pills because their shelf life would not extend as long as Damien wants his art to last, which we presume is forever. But they are facsimiles made out of some sort of painted metal, perhaps bronze. I think you can get a sense of their enormous decorative quality. I was walking through the museum in Germany, and I saw a huge pill cabinet. It must have been 20 feet across by about 10 feet tall. And it had this remarkable presence, which is part of the preconditioning that I think gave me that sense when I subsequently, years later, walked into a drugstore and thought of Damien. Now, Damien is the person who has provoked a lot of controversy in the art world. The Art Forum cover story here, April 2006, it appears to be, has to do with the human skull that he covered with diamonds, and his title, and Damien is brilliant in his use of titles, is a quote from his mother in which he said, "For the love of God." It certainly raises many interesting questions, and we're going to address those questions forthwith. One of the questions that comes out, of course, is can you see the art for the money that is sparkling through the diamonds? There are all kinds of doubts about how and why Damien created this kind of work. He brings up issues of life and death. This slide is a little fuzzy because I took it from a Hirshhorn lecture of Simon Schama, so I give Simon credit for showing us the dove on the right ascending up into the heavens and the skull on the left. Damien is playing with issues of life and death. And whether this huge and very controversial work that he made, a huge tiger shark that was put into the formaldehyde case, I should mention to you that this case changes your experience of what that shark is. If we saw this shark in a natural history museum, it would not work the way you would imagine an object of its sort would, because the cadencing of those vertical white struts shifts in a very dramatic way your experience of it. So you are certainly looking at one of the ideas, the metaphor of how can you experience death. Now, we're looking at a copy of the Art newspaper, and I wanted to point out to you that the question of commerce has now entered into this, and all you have to do is look over there and see that on the bottom left the title says, Hearst, better than Microsoft or Oracle. The shark has yielded an annual return of 41.6% over the last 13 years, to which we can only say, well, what's that about? Now, there was an enormous pushback against this commodification of art with its rising prices, and it produced a book that really got my goat, and it's called The $12 Million Stuffed Shark, and it was written by someone who actually tried, I think, to suggest that it was all a ruse, as it were, that the contemporary art world was, in effect, just wearing the emperor's new clothes, and it was all about vanity and had nothing to do with the quality of thinking that I think, in fact, informs and is invested in these works. But the metrics of money are appealing. They can't help but get people's attention, and I can tell you that in the world out there, art has become, and here's one of the secrets of the art world, a new alternative asset class. When I first started collecting, my parents thought I was crazy. My mother said, you paid good money for that. And my banker said, I'm sorry, son, please take these things off your financial statement. I have no way of valuing them, and they do not belong in your portfolio as I understand it. I want to point out to you that that Best Buy logo, which I caught from the back of a cab as I was leaving New York City, uses both the color and the exact type of Ed Ruscha, Oof. Now, Oof was put there because I was thinking, well, how do you talk about the metrics of art as it gets confused by money? And for me, one of the proofs of the Oof was something Ed Ruscha said. He said, when you're looking at art, what you want to get first is the huh, and then go to the wow. What you don't want is to see it first and go, wow, and then eventually go, huh? So that's one easy secret about how you can judge what you're looking at. Damien Hirst, who I mentioned, put the shark in formaldehyde, also proceeded to put other animals, some of which I might add were sawed in half. I should tell you that when I first saw this work, it offended many people because they thought that Damien had some kind of cruel sense of fascination with death that ignored the sanctity of life. And my reaction, while I think that is a credible one, and no single reaction to art is compelling, perhaps I'm the black sheep in this story, in that I actually thought that these works were enormously compassionate. As it were, we've seen that diamond-encrusted skull. They could be the modern memento mori, reminding you that the joy of this moment in the world is something that's fleeting, that your time here is limited, and in fact, you should consider the issues of life and death, which I think are in fact juxtaposed and absolutely consciously put for us to look at with these two animals. Of course, Damien is very clever. He is an enormously successful entrepreneur, something I might add that is somewhat unusual. The myth of the starving artist is no longer the role model that contemporary artists follow. In this particular work, Damien, I think, was playfully talking about the golden calf that the Israelites were found worshiping when Moses came down from the Mount Sinai to deliver the Ten Commandments, and the fact that the frame is gold and that there's this gold scepter on top of the calf and the formaldehyde was a intentional, tongue-in-cheek, pun intended, gesture to that question. I can tell you that when the single sale was held, there were people, and this was not from that sale, but when you go to an auction house, as you head up the stairs, sometimes this is what you'll see. There is that sense of celebration and of being sold something. As John Russell once said in The Meanings of Modern Art, a work of art is an idea bank. It is also an emblem of the good life, but more than that, it is about what it is trying to tell us. Damien Hirst learned that you could build a brand. You're looking here at an enormous variety of the kind of works that he has done. Of course, you don't have any sense of scale. You can see in the upper left there is a spin picture which has a skull. Underneath it is a set of cigarette butts, a work that we'll return to. On the bottom left are dot paintings, butterflies, butterfly paintings, and of course the Better Living Through Chemistry, Damien Hirst brand of his use of pills as a metaphor for modern living. Of course, you may have heard, but if you haven't, on literally the day that Lehman Brothers fell, Damien Hirst sold $198 million worth of his art directly at auction. He did not go through a dealer, and it would appear that he is an enormously clever promoter. But beyond that, I think he's an enormously gifted artist. I want to shift now to the notion of how branding and advertising is something that we see every day. And those companies that sell the cosmetics and the hair salons, shampoos, are in this image, of course, trading on Botticelli's Venus. On the right, you see an advertisement that I saw driving through the streets of New York and its original source. Here you see the Italian espresso taken at some airport, trading off of the Leonardo da Vinci image of the man circle in the square, except in this instance, it's a woman. And of course, who better than Andy Warhol to represent this notion of crossover between graphic design? You may know that Andy Warhol's career in New York started as a graphic designer, and so he could appreciate, and he knew what got people's interest. He knew as an illustrator how you could sell something to someone because he had done it over and over and over, and he was one of the best. And then, of course, he appropriated the image of Marilyn Monroe. This image was taken from a publicity shot by Philippe Halsman, and you can see that what better idea of selling someone else's fame, of branding her face, than taking a publicity shot of Marilyn Monroe and making it into art. And I think it's an interesting statement about how good Warhol was at what he did, that at least in New York, among that group, if you show people a picture of Warhol's image on the right, and ask them what they're looking at, they generally say, I'm looking at an Andy Warhol. They don't say I'm looking at a Marilyn Monroe. And it just goes to show you how much that crossover actually exists in people's minds. Of course, art influences advertising. It's a full circle. On the left, you see an Andy Warhol. Interestingly enough, I photographed this just over the weekend up at one of the auction houses. It appears that Levi Strauss commissioned Andy to do one of his multiple images. On the same day, I was walking down Madison Avenue some 20 or so years later, 25 years later, and you can see how the advertising on the right of whatever the shop was selling was borrowing Andy's very beautiful and clever use of colors and repetition of imagery to suggest something. In addition, high art borrows kitsch. This is another one of our friend Damien Hirst's amazingly large works. It is a butterfly picture. He has appropriated the image of the heart, which of course is a very kitschy image. And no conversation about contemporary art and kitsch is successful without at least making an honorable mention of Jeff Koons, who did this amazingly high finish, and you will soon see the scale of it, blue heart. And if you don't like the color blue, you can get it in lots of other colors. Jeff is a very interesting artist. He is somebody that I've never fully come to understand. This is an example of the kind of research I do when I'm looking at art. I read the articles, I underline them, I make my notes, and I'm not going to linger too long on this because you may find me being more critical than is appropriate. Here, the heart appears at art and auction. Now you can see the scale of it. It is certainly, I would say, about 7 foot tall and probably about 12 feet across. It became one of the trophy art acquisitions of the 2008 bubble, the art bubble. Of course, Jeff started out by celebrating kitsch. You can see some of the earlier works he did from what a series he called Banality. I frankly did not get these pieces. I am not a person that I celebrate banality. I've been, by many collector friends of mine, told I'm missing the boat and that in fact I'm a snob because I don't get it. But the dumbing down that Jeff does is something that he changed, and he created some amazing sculptural works in the ensuing decade. On the right, I think, is one of the best works of the 1990s in terms of sculpture. It's called The Bunny. It is about the life size of the bunny you would buy if you were at the zoo and you got that plastic bunny, but of course it's covered with this enormously bright and brilliant aluminum patina. On the left, and you can see the scale of the work called The Puppy by Jeff Koons, and it is covered with flowers. It is one of the most popular and successful crowd drawers. It is now located, I believe, one of the versions is in front of Bilbao, the museum that Frank Gehry built. And last but certainly not least, Balloon Dog. You can see the scale of this piece by the size of the escalator behind it. And as I said, if you don't like it in blue, you can get it in red. In addition to that, you can see that Jeff was making, I think, a very conscious homage to Andy Warhol with the easy, fun silver balloon that is on the wall to the right, in which the red balloon dog is reflected. That is for those of you that know Warhol's career, of course, the factory in New York, he covered with silver tin foil to give it this shimmering sense, and he actually did a project where he released silver balloons. So this whole notion of artists looking over their shoulder and borrowing methodologies of getting their work seen, getting their work understood, is something that I think is a thread through contemporary art. Of course, when I was down in Miami, I actually saw a billboard that was being erected that I think was a joke. I never called that particular number to find out, but it certainly is clear that that has become a part of the mentality of artists working today, and I don't think that's necessarily bad. Warhol is, of course, the darling of the auction houses. He is the single, perhaps, most consistent and successful artist in that regard. This was taken actually just 3 days ago on the trip that I made to preview the auctions, and as we'll soon discuss, an auction house can be a very interesting place to look at art for any number of reasons. In this instance, some people are there to see the art, and in other instances, they're there to see, well, you can guess it. This is a work that Warhol made around 1961. It's, I believe, 200 $1 bills, silk screened, and it set an enormous price, I think somewhere in the neighborhood of, and I may be wrong on this, but $25 million. Can you see the art on the wall when you're actually looking at the money? It's a question that I'm not actually sure how to answer, but I'm going to try momentarily. I want to speak to you when people ask me then, well, so how is the art market? There is no single art market that anyone can describe. In fact, there are a number of art markets. You start out with the young and the restless, which is the broadest group, and then there are up-and-coming artists who've had a show or two and whose work are a little bit more known. They might have been written about, they've probably been seen. Then there are the more mature artists whose careers have been around for some time. And at the top of this price pyramid, and that's all it is a price pyramid, is the trophy art. And Warhol is the darling of the trophy art world. In that regard, the financial institutions that at one time said art had no metric, and I think they were right in terms of saying if we don't understand the metrics of money, we shouldn't include it because we don't know how to deal with it. Banks should and are appropriately conservative about alternative asset classes that are not their skill set. But now in New York, you'll be interested to know that there are actually art capital group private banking for the art world. And my administrative assistant, who long-sufferingly helped me put this together, said, you know, even some of the financial institutions have their own art collections now. And of course, that is a new phase of art where it has become of interest. In exploring the new, of course, video is something that's always coming into new forms. I recommend to your attention upstairs, there is a gallery that John Hanhart, who the new curator coming here to the American Art Museum from first the Whitney and the Guggenheim. The gallery upstairs is called Watch This. We have a great Nam June Paik upstairs, and he will be doing a retrospective of Nam June Paik. And if you're interested in what's possible, Nam June Paik was one of the earliest and still, I think, most influential video artists, and it's a great chance for you to familiarize yourself with it. And if you have the time, go upstairs to see Nam Joon's work, Electronic Super Highway, which is a very interesting work. It should come as no surprise that the world around us is going to echo some of the same characteristics that the art world is trying to take on. This is an image of one of the many moments in Times Square in New York as you're leaving. No, actually Barclays, it might be London. But in any case, it is this ubiquitous vista of media and lights. I was mesmerized in one window where I saw these images just flying in front of you. And I should tell you that it echoes a feeling I have as a collector. For all of my efforts, I am often baffled, as anyone else is, about where the next possible statement of quality of thinking is going to come and how I can be prepared for it. We see in this world something that Peter Sheldell, I think, referred to somewhat disparaging as bright, shiny things. On the left, there is a actual The Bunny by Jeff Koons, and coincidentally on the media screen, as if the bunny is looking at an image of himself floating up there in the Macy's Day Parade. I thought that was hilarious. It was a show called Pop Art in the Tate Gallery, and not one that I thought was a celebration of the best quality of thinking, although it did have enormously good works. And then on the right is a series of media screens which reflects the diversity of possibilities that are now being explored by artists. And while we're on the subject of bright, shiny things, I went to London to explore work by Anish Kapoor, who was making these kind of funhouse mirrors. I looked at this particular one in a show, and I wasn't as wild about these works because I didn't understand where they fit in terms of expanding the vocabulary. But when I went to the Frieze Art Fair, he had done a variation of it that had this kind of octagon, almost like a bee's or an insect's eye, pixelating effects, and it just knocked my socks off. It is, as you can see, very large. It's 8 feet across. And if you want to know what that little girl was actually reacting to, if you look at this close-up of her face, she's smiling. And I think that that's an important role for contemporary art. I don't mean to suggest that it always has to be obscure or difficult or impossible to understand. And that smile was reflected by my wife's smile. That's what happens when you stand in front of the work. I bumped into Anish after purchasing this work, and I thanked him for his enormous creativity, but I also told him that I thought, because I had seen my wife's face in his work, that it was even more beautiful than he might have imagined. He said, "Fine, I'm really glad you liked it." That's because the check had cleared. I should also tell you, and here's a secret of the art world, when we were down at a small island, we decided that we'd ride around and take a look at some of the property out of total and utterly idle curiosity. And the realtor down there told us that this beautiful lot was owned by an artist by the name of Anish Kapoor, and I went, "Oh, that's really interesting." And he said, and actually, he made a mistake because he tore the house down here thinking he was going to build here, but then he bought another lot, and now he's got 2 lots here. And I thought, isn't it interesting that now the collectors are renting and the artists are buying and building the houses? And I think it's a good thing. You don't always have to pay a trophy art price to get a work of art you love. This work by Stephen Dean, which is called Prayer Mill, is made of dichromatic glass, which is put into a postcard rack that has an inner rack so that in the former iteration, the stored postcards would be available to the merchant to restock, and the outside rack. And when the sunlight hits it, it is truly miraculous in its colors, and I find it enormously rich and rewarding. I think it's important that you remember that in looking at art, you need to take time to understand it. A good work of art is something like a good friend. It gets better with age. And art that stands the test of time continues to have broader sense of possibilities and metaphors. And just as you grow and bring more experiences to it, it will expand and allow you to engage in a richer and more dynamic dialogue with it. I want to mention that for all of my efforts to be focused and disciplined and follow the rules, often chance plays a big role. Of course, 90% of success is showing up, and then what else happens can often be a matter of chance. This is a reproduction of a wonderful Richard Diebenkorn painting that I dearly wanted to buy. It reflected a lot of where my collection at that time was focused, which is to say gestural, romantic painting. It had that quality of looking through the artist's studio, Ocean Park, California, waking up and smelling the coffee. And while I was at that particular preview, and this is one of the reasons I mentioned to you that auctions can be a very interesting place to see art, I happened to bump into this picture, and it knocked my socks off. It was one of the most powerful expressions of Andy Warhol's, what is now referred to as his death and disaster, an image of Jackie Kennedy with the veil on at the funeral following the assassination of the president. And I thought to myself, now that is an amazing picture. I came back and spoke to the head of the Hirshhorn and said, I really think this is a history picture that has its place in Washington. I think you should get it. We have the Maryland lips 100 times, but we don't have this kind of iconic image. And he said, you know, I agree with you, but I think right now it's sometimes more complicated for museums on short notice to be able to pull together the necessary finances and approvals to make this kind of acquisition. So he said, why don't you get it and you can give it to us when you're done with it. So I actually bid at auction for this work, and when I purchased it, this is an example of what I was thinking on the phone. This is an example of how I felt. The monk's scream when I became the successful bidder. In fact, my agent went one bid above what I had authorized him. I had said, if we get to that number, you should call me because we're on the phone together and tell me if I'm willing to do one more bid. Of course, one more bid can take you up to the heavens. And I said to him, so who is that at our stretch number? And he said, that's us, pal. And I said, but I didn't authorize you to do that. You were supposed to ask me. And he said, well, we're there, pal. Let's pause from this drama of commerce and go to what Andy was actually, I think, about. The 16 Jackies, 1965, it will help you to know, come out of Warhol's interest that I think started when he was a child in Pittsburgh. He was so poor that his mom would take he and his brothers to the church. I believe it's a Russian Orthodox. It's not well known, but Andy Warhol was an observant Catholic. And those images of the saints that you see on either side of the altarpiece was something that he took quite seriously, something got imprinted on him. Believe it or not, this is what Andy had literally right next to his bed in New York. It's pictures you can see of Madonna and Child. You can see the crucifix on his nightstand. This is a man who, having all of the brash and bright social world of New York, nonetheless had quiet convictions. And if you want to know where the cowl and the image from that sad day in 1963 came from, I suggest you can go back in art history and look at this 16th century image by Cimabue, and certainly Jackie stood as our Madonna of the Sorrows. I almost hesitated to buy the Warhol because I did feel its elegiac power might be too sad for me to live with. I can tell you that it has not, over time, proved to be difficult to live with. It is actually enormously inspiring. And that sense, this is a picture that is a variation of the image of Jackie. Warhol did, I think, 6 different ones. I hope you can get some sense of the iconic power that Warhol was aware of. He was looking at fame with Marilyn. He was looking at fortune, or the lack thereof, in terms of this sad tragedy. But he had his finger on the pulse of something that became very important, and that is in part the quality of thinking and the distance that he was able to get to give us a more accurate mirror of our times. Sometimes art will offer you an opportunity to have very surprising juxtapositions. When I bought the Damien Hirst cabinet of cigarette butts on the left, again, the issue of better living through chemistry is at least inferred by that. In a million years, I never imagined that it would work well with the 16 Jackies. However, as you can see juxtaposed across from each other, the repetition and the use of a very clean and simple grid is something that seems to speak one work to the other. When people look at art that they don't understand, one of the simplest ways to get it, as it were, is just to say, well, what is it I'm looking at? And when I have this kind of discussion with people that come to understand what this cabinet of cigarettes are about, it's very easy to quickly say, well, it's about cigarettes. And what do cigarettes mean? They mean cancer. And why do people smoke? Because, well, they're addicted. And why do they still smoke? Well, it gives them pleasure. And how is it presented? It's very clean, it's very antiseptic, it's behind glass. And within 30 seconds, we've talked about a work of art that has pleasure and pain and life and death and medicine and disposable trash and treasure. I mean, it's an enormously rich set of ideas that Hirst, I think, has managed to put into a seemingly worthless disposable object, just the way Andy Warhol took yesterday's newspaper with the images of Jackie, and by representing it to us in a new way, gave it new meaning. So good ideas take us to new places. I saw this advertisement at the train station on my way back. Invest in imagination is something that I believe in. Here it's being used as a commercial promotional for iShares, but I think it applies equally to the world of the quality of thinking that we look at in art, which expands our world. This is another advertisement. What did you do today? That kind of sense, have you expanded your envelope? Has your day produced something meaningful? Here's an image of my office from my desk. You'll see that the prayer mill sculpture that is shining with a light, you can actually see it on the concrete floor. I often think of my office when it's not pure pandemonium as a laboratory for me to live with and look at art. If you look to the left through that doorway, you'll see that there's a very blue light that you might perceive now that I've pointed out to you. It comes from a sculpture, and Tracy Emin is the name of this neon sculpture. One of the happy discoveries, and I initially was not keen on her work. I saw this work at an art fair with my wife. She thought it was sincere. I thought it was ironic. We both agreed that it was something that we could enjoy, and it consistently reminds me that her love emanates from her office even when she's not there. The world of art is a very complicated network of people. If you are a collector, you will get known for what your passions are, for what your attitude is, and it is this group of people that as you get to know will help you to learn more about the art, and eventually, if you are fortunate and sincere, and work at it. And it is, I think, something that you have to be dedicated to do well to have access to it. Going to galleries is a great way, of course, to see it. This will give you some sense of the scale of some of Damien Hirst's works. Another way to get access to a lot of art is to go to the art fairs. And if you think it's easy to go through, this is an overview of what an art fair looks at like. This is the, I believe it's the Miami Art Fair. And that little smiley face down there on the right is how you start, but it's after a while finding the needle in the haystack that matches your particular interest can sometimes be a daunting experience, but if nothing else, it gives you the opportunity under one roof to see hundreds and hundreds of different galleries, each who show about, I would say, 10 different artists who have probably worked at least 2 years on a body of work. If you do the math, what you're looking at when you look into a art fair is about 2,000 years of human experience. And often I come from these explorations, which I sometimes call due diligence, to just keep up with the art market and wonder what's wrong with me that I have not been able to find anything that's inspiring to me. But nonetheless, being out there helps us to know more about what's going on. Another way, and it's not one that I could speak to because I don't use it, is the online. I have not bought, nor do I think it's good to try to do so, artwork from online. On the other hand, Saatchi has his online explorations, and in this information age, you can get a lot of information online. You can get access, of course, through auctions. And does money create taste? I don't doubt that it does. I have to tell you that the name wall power, in terms of looking at art, some people think of wall power as the money that the art represents. I think of wall power as being the creative energy that the artwork emanates. Does it affect the way we look at things? I think it does. Overcoming the doubt of the new is a challenge I'm constantly trying to come up with. I should say to you that the John Curran nude on the right was obviously a representation of the Eve from Lucas Chronic, going back hundreds and hundreds of years. For a long time, I couldn't figure out what it was about, and I thought that I might actually like the picture for the wrong reason. I mentioned that in passing when I had a chance to talk to Peter Sheldell, the art critic for The New Yorker, who I think is one of the most thoughtful and poetic of reviewers, and he said, Robert, there can be no wrong reason to like art. If you like it, you like it. And I should also tell you that one of the secrets of the art world is that even if you are a committed collector, there is more money in the world than there is great art. And if you accept the possibility that this painting on the right is one of those objects, I actually spent about 5 or 6 years talking and working with the gallery, hoping that they would offer me a work of art. And when they called me and finally told me that this work was available, I could not believe my lucky stars, because there were probably 25 people in New York alone who would jump at the chance to get a picture like this. And the dealer told me I had one day, and I didn't need one day. I really only needed one heartbeat to say I wanted it. You don't always get it. This is an interesting work by Mike Kelly, or a couple of works in which he was playing off of some ideas, and I'm not going to try to elaborate them. Certainly he was talking about childhood and cutesy and many other things. I just want to point out to you that it's okay not to get things. One of the secrets of the art world is that museum support, which is, I think, important, and I've worked on the Board of Trustees of museums in Washington and elsewhere, not only to support them, but to learn from their intellectual currency that they share in the process of bringing you along as a trustee. Museum support is being seriously challenged by a new wave of new museums. This is one of the best that I've seen, the De La Cruz Museum in Miami, just finishing its construction. This is the interior of it, as you can see, very spare, very beautiful, very white, very open. And they allow collectors to have their own works in a private foundation or a museum. The museums are often open to the public by appointment and have educational outreach. This is another example, far more busy, also in Miami, owned by Marty Margulies. You can see the monitor screens in the middle of the video image of the artist whose work I actually cannot tell you. I thought it was fascinating and I didn't get the name. There is a question, what lasts forever? And of course, that is the ultimate question. Will the artwork last, not only be of its time and timely, but transcend its time? I suggest to you in this adventure of looking that what you see is probably more based upon what's behind your eyes than what's in front of them. This is a reproduction of a billboard. 50% of the creative process is in the eyes of the viewer. This is a reproduction of a photograph, and you probably know that it is the Marlboro Man instantly, Marlboro being the brand that needs no name to tell you what it is. I saw this by Richard Prince back in the 80s when the appropriation art was something new, at least new to me, and I asked a wonderful collector who was much older and more experienced, how will this picture look in 50 years, Arthur? And Arthur Goldberg said to me, Robert, it'll look a lot better than you will in 50 years. And he added, the only way you're going to find out how it's going to stand the test of time is to live with it. And I have, and I'm very glad that I did. So this is a view of an installation, Lawrence Weiner at the Whitney Museum of Art. If I leave you with no other thought that I hope will be helpful to you, it is that the mind can see farther than the eye, and that your engagement in that regard will be rewarding. It can be a religious experience. These are Damien Hirst windows. I flew out to Los Angeles to see the show, fully expecting that the gesture was so mannered and so Baroque that it would somehow not be compelling and convincing. And I have to tell you, I was thrilled upon arrival to learn that I was wrong. It was enormously compelling. It is a matter of faith in terms of believing that you get to that moment where you see something and it clicks and the world looks differently. It's a hard place to get to, but it's worth the effort, and it can be an ecstatic journey. What we're looking at here is, of course, the Ecstasy of St. Teresa, which is in Rome at the Canoro Chapel, Santa Maria del Victoria, It is a remarkable sculpture, and I encourage you, as you try to advance your contemporary eye, that you also stick with the classics, which teach us every bit as much and more. The picture that I mentioned that I eventually got at the Damien Hirst show in Los Angeles is this butterfly picture. It is what they call a kaleidoscope picture because of the repetition. I was a little worried by all of the commercial hype that Damien Hirst was generating, and I said to my sister, you know, with all of Damien's bravado, I'm not so sure about these butterfly pictures. And she said to me, Robert, when have you ever heard the word butterfly and bravado in the same sentence? So the adventure of collecting for you is about seeing with the mind's eye. This is a picture made in the Museum of Modern Art of Jackson Pollock when he first started doing his pictures in the late 30s and 40s. People didn't quite understand what it was about. I think we now have come to see that it's opened up enormous new worlds of possibilities. I hope that in the process you enjoy the journey. And speaking of the journey, it can sometimes be an enormously physical experience. This is a very poor photograph of one of Richard Serra's huge sculptures. You can see by the scale in front of you that it is probably 18 feet tall. They're called torqued ellipses. As you enter them, you get to have this sense of being squeezed, then you move through them, and all of a sudden you're aware that the materiality, which makes physical impression upon you, is balanced by the light that comes down from above. This image is from James Turrell's Rodin Crater, where you cannot walk up those stairs, but you can see the light of the heavens coming through, a phenomenological work of art that is part of land art. I hope that this lecture has been something of an enlightening experience for you. What you're looking at is a corner piece by Dan Flavin. I was mesmerized by the colors that these tubes of fluorescent light bathed the walls with, the blue and the yellow and the merging colors. I want to say to you that art comes in and out of favor. Our most cherished Vermeer painter in his time was popular, then fell out of favor. These are two pictures. The one on the right actually is from the National Gallery, and you can see it there. I should point out to you that even way back then, the masters were aware of the difference between the temporal riches, as you see the arrow directs your eye to the tabletop, which has both money, pearls, and the balance. And in the background is an image of Jesus up in the heavens. Perhaps this is a reminder that the day of judgment will come, and how you judge things will be based upon your core values and who you are. It is not always a walk in the park, but it is often a very rewarding experience. And as we close out, you're looking at another Dan Flavin that is on the backside of the Royal Academy in London, in which you go up this grand staircase. And what would have been in that niche, I can't tell you. We know generically it would be something of the sort of a king or perhaps a duke or someone of power. But what in fact was placed there was another Dan Flavin, and I viewed that as truly a startling secular annunciation, a celebration of light, and you can see how the entire niche is colored with this ethereal light. This is a plaque from one of the truisms of Jenny Holzer. I think it's true that finding extreme pleasure will make you a better person if you're careful about what thrills you. And that is the end of the Secrets of the Art World lecture. We were told there would be a short question and answer period, and I'm happy to linger longer if you have pressing questions. Anybody want to throw one out, break the ice? Yes?
That huge Sarah sculpture, where do you put that?
Well, that's a good question. They are enormous. You would probably need to have a lot of land and a place where you could enjoy it outside, although you saw it actually in a gallery, if you can imagine it. The galleries in New York, it was, by no surprise, the Gagosian Gallery. I'm told that the cost of getting those works in is in the 7 figures. That's what it costs to transport them and put them. So your ambition, you need to be an institution, a museum, or an individual with the wherewithal that you can actually have that amount of space, that amount of height, and that amount of budget to be able to get them where you want them. They are compelling experiences, and if you do have a chance to see one, I really recommend you go in them. One of my artist dealer friends that made the observation, she said if the Earth was revisited 30,000 years from now by some alien race, all they would need to know about the end of the 20th century could be discovered by going through a Richard Serra sculpture. Yeah. Well, shout it out and I'll repeat your question.
3.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. I'm just curious, your early days of collecting art, did the artwork actually eventually get recognized and appreciated at all? That's my first question. My second question is, I actually collect African and Caribbean art paintings. I actually have a website, the worldartgallery.com, and I don't know, I just buy them. I go to galleries when I travel to those countries, and I go to visit galleries and shows and to pick up things. And I wonder whether there is a network or market here in Washington or in the US at all.
Let me answer the first question and say that whether a young artist's work gets seen and recognized and appreciated is dependent upon a number of very complex factors. But I think the most important one is the quality of their creative input. And it's my belief and my experience that yes, young artists do get seen, they get shown, they get written about, they get appreciated, so they do. In terms of your second question, I am not the person to tell you how to network in art because I come at it from a different point of view. But certainly, I believe there are many avenues by which you can do so. And I encourage you to explore them because with your interest, you're likely to broaden your horizons as well as those of people who share your interest. Yeah. Yes, the question was, are there art critics that I read and pay attention to? I try to read as much as I can in art criticism. My favorite I've already mentioned, his name is Peter Sheldal, and he writes for The New Yorker, and he is enormously poetic. Another art critic who I think is extraordinarily brilliant is named Dave Hickey. Blake Gopnik used to write for the Washington Post, and he's gone on to Newsweek. He is very thoughtful. There are a number of other art critics that I could mention, but rather than give you a long list, those are 3. Certainly, Blake's brother, Adam Gopnik, when he writes about art, he's a genius. He's also very brilliant. He writes less about art than I would like. But those are a number of my favorites. I used to love reading Robert Hughes. He doesn't write anymore, but I thought he had that sort of above-the-tree view of the art world, and I learned a lot from reading him as well. Yeah. Well, I can't speak about others. I think that is true. The question is, if I started out buying what I love, did it change as I got more experienced and the effort became more research? My mentor, Walter Hopps, told me that the 3 legs of the stool are always the same. First, you have to fall in love. Then, you have to do your homework. And third, you have to pay a premium above a high price to get a great work of art. My art world mentor, Aunt Natalie, told me that if you love a work of art, you can never go wrong, because if it goes up in value, people will think you're smart. If it stays what you paid for it, you got the benefit of the bargain that you made. And if it goes down in value, and that can happen, as long as you love it, then it doesn't really matter that it went down. So it is true that I do more homework, I do more research. Part of the research is to get as much information as you can about the artist. Artists have good, better, best works, and it's always important to make those kind of discoveries. Some of it is subjective, what you like the best, but art will speak to you over time and you'll learn the difference. One of the exercises that I try to do is when I go into an art gallery and I look at a group of objects, whether it's by a single artist or many artists, whether it's an art gallery or an art museum, I look around and I say, which work do I like the most and why? And it's an exercise in refining your eye. And by doing research, galleries have an incentive to help you to learn, but you ultimately need to do it yourself. So while it has changed in terms of me doing more work, it hasn't changed in terms of I will never buy anything that I don't love and that I don't want to live with. Yeah.
I'm just curious if your long-term objective is to have a museum or...
The question is, do I want to have my own museum? And the answer is absolutely not. I think Washington has an enormously rich diversity of museums, and I am a team player. And I do think that if some of my art is up to the standard, that it would be great if it could complement and be given, as Jim Demetrian suggested, to the museums of Washington. I do not need to have my taste validated by having my own museum. Yeah.
You didn't mention Joseph Cornell in your talk tonight. Could you say something about collecting Cornell?
Joseph Cornell is an artist who I have long admired. My mentor, Walter Hopps, brought me to his work while I was looking at the Young and the Restless artists in the 80s. I subsequently became fascinated by Cornell's vast cosmology of ideas and eventually put together a group of boxes that was based upon the notion that the sum of the boxes would be larger than any individual part. And so I do love and have collected Cornell with an enormous respect. The book and the DVD-ROM, which I collaborated with the American Art Museum here, was an attempt to reflect what I discovered in Cornell's work, which was that you go through the looking glass, which I think is true in almost any work of art by a good or great artist, and enter a whole nother cosmology of ideas that were as broad as science, nature, poetry, dance, the arts, in a broad array of interesting associations. And Cornell is an artist who I think you can learn a lot if you have the patience to not go for the bright, shiny thing that Peter Sheldrake described was the rage of the last decade, but to the more quiet, clear, contemplative possibilities of the intimacy of his art, which has enormous metaphorical range of possibilities. Yeah. I used to have more work. The question is, do I have enough space to display all my artwork, and is there a warehouse somewhere? The answer to that is no and yes. No, I don't have enough space to display all of it, and yes, there is a warehouse somewhere. But I have tried to live with the art that I have because I really want it to be up, and sometimes works move, they go to museums on loan, they're rotated, and often that requires you to rehang an entire room. Another secret, quote unquote, of the art world is that art will tell you where it wants to be, so that when one work of art leaves for whatever combination of reasons, perhaps a museum loan, the next work that comes in may create a game of musical chairs where you reshuffle everything. I'm not the type of collector that has vast warehouses of art. I used to have more of that, and I have tried to trade up with works that if I can't enjoy them, I try to find places where they can be seen or appreciated by way of sometimes getting 2 or 3 works and then getting one, trading that for another work, or in some instances giving it to institutions that would like to have the work that I may no longer have a space for. Any other questions?
Can you comment about your foundation?
Well, the Voyager Foundation was created to do educational art projects, the first of which was the Joseph Cornell book and the DVD-ROM. And the next project that the foundation is going to do, I'm hoping, is a book that will follow some of the course of ideas that we were looking at tonight. Yeah.
Consider acquiring contemporary art from China or other countries?
The question is, have I ever considered acquiring contemporary art from China or other emerging markets? And I have very actively considered that. And I find it one of the more challenging, and for me at the moment, unclear directions. And part of my logic is that I don't think that I have enough understanding of the issues that those societies have gelled in the artists to truly appreciate their work. And I have seen it because it has become a very, Chinese art is big, it's in the art market, it's in the galleries, it's in the auctions. I have to say, and this is not meant as a criticism, it is just meant as a description, that I find much of that work grotesque. And I don't understand the social backstory that generates this, and it doesn't resonate with me. So because I don't love it and haven't yet fully come to understand it, I have not tried to collect it, but I do actively look at it. And I should tell you that I have found it more and more interesting with time. It is not without considerable interest, but I have not bought any myself. Yeah.
I'm just curious about your item number 5 here, where it says art is not a good financial investment, because it seems like everything you said indicated that you have financial investment.
I'm glad you brought that up. I don't think that art is a good financial investment to the average person. It's sort of like, the best analogy I can give you is going to the racetrack. Don't go to the racetrack to try to make money. Go to have a good time. And if you happen to pick a winner, that's great. But art is very expensive. It costs money to maintain. You have to insure it. The works of art that you saw here have been reported on by the press because they represent the very small percentage of art that has been financially successful. The thing that it does give you is unlimited dividends of joy if you love it. I don't mean to say, and I put that up there intentionally, so I'm very grateful to you for mentioning it, I don't mean to say that art can't be a good financial investment, and it is an alternative asset class. But I would tell you that it is a very risky one, and one that you should not, I think, enter expecting to get those kind of rewards any more than you could go into the stock market and pick a startup company now and predict that it will be the next Google or Facebook. But that's not to say it can't be, just that I don't think it is what I would call a good one. It's a great one if you pick the right horse. Yeah. Well, I think reproductions are great in terms of allowing you to be inspired, and you know, every college kid has a story about how the reproductions were up on their wall, and that really got them to thinking. So I think it's wonderful, and I think it has enormous possibilities. In terms of my own experience, I came from that. Yeah, when I was a college kid, I had reproductions up. I can't exactly remember what they were. However, as a collector, I'm really interested in the artist's hand and the gesture. So the notion of reproductions for me is something that I may have moved through, but I think it's fabulous. You know. You have to have an enormous curiosity to be in a position to have a mentor. I think you need to make the kind of commitment to spend time with the person, and then you need to figure out who that person is and where they might be. And part of it is luck. It happened to be that I've had many mentors, several I should say, not many. And it is a product of being in the museum community and somebody you start a conversation with over a period of time. You learn that there's an awful lot you can do. Walter Hopps, when he would come to town, I would take a vacation day from my job and just drive him around because I wanted to learn from him. And by creating that space of time, which was very unorthodox, I had a chance to build a rapport with him. I was friendly with the people he was friendly with, and he saw my interest in Cornell. Much to my delight, I learned that after I did the Cornell DVD-ROM, which was largely an attempt to express what I had learned from him and on my own. I later learned, although he didn't tell me this, but one of his friends did, that he was enormously proud of me, that I had learned what he had tried to share with me, and that it reflected in a way that he was pleased about. So it comes out, I think, first from your passion, a shared interest, and being willing to do the work and put the time in, and hopefully a lucky coincidence of access to people of kindred spirit and interest. And I have found that the great people in any profession respect and admire that kind of interest and are willing to reciprocate it to help you to follow the path, your path, as they have followed theirs. All right, well, I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.